The satellite feed cut to black at 3:47 hours, and in that moment 12 Navy SEALs became ghosts. Command lost telemetry, lost thermal signatures, lost everything except the last transmission, a voice compressed by panic and static, calling for immediate air support in a valley that officially didn't exist. The operations room in Bagram went silent. Analysts stared at empty screens. Someone whispered a prayer. The SEALs had pushed deep into the Korangal, chasing a high-value target whose capture could shift the entire theater. Now they were pinned in a dried riverbed, surrounded by an enemy force that had grown from a squad to a company in less than 20 minutes. The Taliban had been waiting. They'd known. And as the sun began its slow crawl over the Hindu Kush, those 12 Americans understood what the silence meant. No satellite coverage, no Apache gunships in range, no fast movers overhead. Just them, their ammunition, and the certainty that the enemy was tightening the noose. At Kandahar Airfield, Captain Raven Kovac sat in the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, running her pre-flight checks with the methodical precision of someone who had done this 600 times before. The Warthog looked brutal even at rest, nose painted with jagged teeth, titanium bathtubs surrounding the pilot, twin turbofans mounted high to avoid ground debris. Raven's hands moved across switches and dials, her expression unreadable behind tinted visor and oxygen mask. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up. She returned it. They'd flown together for 8 months, and he'd learned not to ask questions when she had that look. The look that meant someone was in trouble. The radio crackled. Hog 11 Tower, we have a tasking, Priority Alpha. Raven's finger paused over the master arm switch. Priority Alpha meant troops in contact. It meant Americans dying. Hog 11 copies, send coordinates. There was a pause, too long. Then, coordinates are grid November Tango 7342. Be advised, no satellite coverage in sector. No other assets available. Weather is degrading. You'll be going in alone. Alone, into the Korangal, the valley where aircraft went to die, where the mountains funneled you into kill zones, where every shepherd could be a spotter and every compound a fortress. Raven felt her jaw tighten. She'd lost friends in that valley, good pilots who'd made one wrong turn, one mistaken assumption. Hog 11, do you copy? She pressed the transmit button. Copy all, request immediate takeoff clearance. Cleared for immediate, Godspeed, Hog. Raven advanced the throttles. The twin turbofans spooled up with a rising shriek, and the A-10 began to roll. The sun was rising over the Hindu Kush, painting the mountains in shades of gold and blood. Somewhere in that wilderness, 12 men were counting their remaining magazines and making peace with their choices. They didn't know that help was coming. They didn't know about the pilot who'd already turned toward them, who'd already made the decision that would define both their lives and hers. They didn't know about Raven. Not yet. The operations center had erupted into controlled chaos within seconds of losing the SEAL team's signal. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb stood at the center of it, a career officer whose gray temples and steady hands spoke of 2 decades managing impossible situations. He stared at the projected map of the Korangal Valley, at the red circle marking the SEAL's last known position, and felt the familiar weight of command settle across his shoulders. Every asset was committed. The nearest Apache team was refueling in Jalalabad, 40 minutes out. Fast movers from the carrier group couldn't reach the valley for an hour. The SEALs didn't have an hour. Sir, we have Hog 11 airborne from Kandahar, an analyst called out. Single ship, Captain Kovac. Webb's expression didn't change, but several officers exchanged glances. Kovac. The name carried weight in certain circles, though not always the kind that inspired confidence. She was competent, nobody questioned that, but she flew like someone with something to prove, took risks that made other pilots uncomfortable. There were whispers about her last deployment, about a mission gone wrong, about decisions made in the heat of combat that hadn't been wrong exactly, but hadn't been right either. 1 A-10, someone muttered, against an entire valley. Webb ignored the comment. Get me a comm link with Hog 11, and somebody tell me what the weather looks like." The meteorologist's report wasn't encouraging. A weather system was pushing in from the northwest, bringing clouds and scattered precipitation. Visibility was deteriorating. In 2 hours, the valley would be socked in completely. Raven was racing not just distance but time itself. In the cockpit, she climbed through 8,000 feet, angling northeast toward the mountains. The A-10 wasn't fast, couldn't be, not with its straight wings and ground attack profile. But it was steady, reliable, built to take punishment and keep flying. She could feel the aircraft around her, feel the 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon nestled in the nose, feel the Maverick missiles and Hydra rocket pods hanging from the wings. 11 tons of armor and ordnance, purpose-built for one mission: close air support. Hog 11 Bagram Control. Be advised, target area is hot. Multiple reports of small arms fire and possible MANPADS. Recommend high-altitude approach. MANPADS. Man-Portable Air Defense Systems. Shoulder-fired missiles that could swat an aircraft from the sky if you flew low and slow, which was exactly how the A-10 was designed to operate. Raven checked her altitude, 12,000 feet and climbing. Copy MANPADS warning. What's the situation on the ground? 12-man SEAL team, call sign Trident 7, pinned in a riverbed. Enemy force estimated at 80 to 100 fighters. Team is critically low on ammunition. They have 15 minutes, maybe less. 15 minutes. Raven did the math. She was 23 minutes out, flying as fast as the Warthog would go. "Understand I'm 8 minutes late," she said quietly. "That's a firm, Hog 11. You're their only chance." She pushed the throttles forward, coaxing another few knots from the straining engines. Below, the green zones of Kandahar gave way to brown desert, then to the foothills that marked the beginning of the mountains. The Hindu Kush rose before her like a wall, peaks touching the sky, valleys carved deep into stone, beautiful and lethal. She'd flown here before, knew its moods and dangers. The mountains didn't care about your training or your experience. They didn't care about the people dying in their shadow. They simply existed, ancient and indifferent, and you either respected them or they killed you. Raven adjusted her heading, threading between two peaks. The A-10 shuddered slightly in mountain turbulence. "Bagram Hog 11, do we have comms with Trident 7? "Negative. Last transmission was 9 minutes ago. We're assuming they're still operational." Assuming, the word hung in the air like smoke. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cross pressed himself against the rocky wall of the riverbed and tried to count how many magazines he had left. 3, maybe 4 if he'd miscounted. Around him, his team had formed a defensive perimeter, a circle that had tightened 3 times in the past hour as casualties mounted and ammunition dwindled. They'd started the mission with 12 men. Now they were down to 9 effective fighters, 2 wounded who could still shoot, and Petty Officer First Class James Morrison, who had a sucking chest wound and was being kept alive through sheer willpower and a rapidly depleting medical kit. The Taliban knew they were low on ammunition. They'd stopped the all-out assaults and switched to methodical suppression fire, pinning the SEALs down while moving fighters into position for the final push. Cross could see them through the gaps in the rocks, figures moving with tactical discipline, taking their time. They had the high ground, the numbers, and patience. The Americans had training, rage, and approximately 10 minutes before their defensive fire became unsustainable. "Chief," whispered Lieutenant Ryan Torres, the team leader, crawling over with blood streaking his face from a scalp wound. "We need to talk about E&E. Escape and evasion." Cross understood what Torres wasn't saying. They needed to scatter, try to break through the encirclement individually, give some of them a chance to reach friendly lines. It was the smart tactical decision. It was also abandoning Morrison, who couldn't move, and probably condemning half the team to death. "No," Cross said simply. "We can't hold this position, you know that." "I know we don't leave our people." Torres' jaw tightened, but he nodded. They both knew how this ended. They'd known since the satellite coverage failed, since the terrain analysis had revealed they were in a communications dead zone, since the enemy force had grown from dozens to hundreds. Some missions you didn't come back from. Some days you wrote your name in the valley's long ledger of the fallen. Then we make them pay for every inch, Torres said. Cross checked his rifle, ejected the magazine, counted rounds. 14. He slammed it back home. Hooah. The word felt like a prayer. Above them, invisible and unknown, Raven's A-10 crossed into the valley's airspace. She descended to 15,000 feet, eyes scanning the ridgelines, looking for the riverbed that matched the coordinates burned into her display. The mountains rose around her like the walls of a cathedral, massive and ancient. Morning light slanted through the peaks, creating shadows that moved and shifted, making terrain recognition difficult. Bagram Hog 11, I'm in the valley, no visual on friendlies yet. Copy Hog 11. Last known position is bearing 045 from your current heading, approximately 6 miles. She banked right, following the riverbed as it wound through the valley floor. Somewhere down there, men were fighting for their lives, were counting their last bullets, were making their peace. Raven scanned the ground through her targeting pod, the thermal imaging painting the world in shades of white and gray. Then she saw it, a cluster of heat signatures in the riverbed, surrounded by dozens more in the ridgelines above. The pattern was unmistakable, a defensive position under siege. Bagram Hog 11 has eyes on, multiple hostiles in the open, beginning attack run. Hog 11, you are cleared hot. Repeat, you are cleared hot. She rolled the A-10 into a dive, nose dropping toward the earth. The altimeter unwound. 15,000 feet, 12,000, 10. The targeting reticle settled on a cluster of fighters moving along a ridgeline, preparing to flank the American position. 8,000 feet, MANPADS range. She felt exposed, vulnerable, aware that somewhere down there could be a Taliban fighter with a missile, finger on the trigger, waiting for exactly this moment. 6,000 feet. The fighters grew larger in her display. Raven's thumb found the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger roared to life. The sound reached the seals before anything else. A deep, tearing bellow that seemed to split the sky itself. Cross looked up and saw the diving through the morning light, saw the muzzle flash beneath its nose, saw the cannon stream of 30mm depleted uranium rounds chewing across the ridgeline like the fist of an angry god. The Taliban fighters there simply ceased to exist, erased in explosions of rock and blood and metal. They pulled up sharply, turbofans screaming, and the seals erupted in ragged cheers. The sound was primal, desperate, the sound of men who'd been staring at death and suddenly saw possibility. Cross keyed his radio, not knowing if anyone could hear, not caring. Air support, friendlies in the riverbed, we are danger close. Static, then a woman's voice, calm and professional. Trident 7, Hog 11, I've got you, keep your heads down. They came around for another pass, this time targeting a group of fighters who'd been preparing to storm the American position. Raven's Maverick missile streaked from the wing, trailing white smoke, and the explosion lifted 3 Taliban into the air like rag dolls. She immediately rolled right, popped flares, anticipating the missile she knew had to be coming. It came. A MANPADS launch from a compound to her north, the rocket motor leaving a distinctive smoke trail as it clawed toward her aircraft. The flares bloomed bright, hot magnesium, designed to seduce the missile's seeker head away from the A-10's heat signature. The missile wavered, confused, then locked onto a flare and detonated 200 feet from Raven's wing. She felt the shockwave, felt the aircraft shudder, but the titanium bathtub around her held. The A-10 kept flying. That's what it did. That's what it was built for. Hog 11 taking fire, she reported, voice steady. Continuing engagement. In the operations center, Webb watched the tactical display with his hands clasped behind his back. He could see Raven's icon circling the engagement zone, could see the enemy positions winking out one by one as she methodically dismantled their attack. But he could also see the missile launches, could see how she was drawing fire, making herself the target to take pressure off the team below. "She's flying too low," someone said. "She's making herself a target." "That's the mission," Webb replied quietly. "That's what close air support means." On her third pass, Raven switched to her Hydra rockets, walking the 70mm warheads across a trench line where Taliban fighters had been organizing for another assault. The explosions marched along the earth like giant footsteps, each one obliterating another section of the enemy position. Dirt and smoke geysered into the sky. Below, Cross was directing his team's fire, coordinating with the A-10 overhead. The dynamic had shifted. The SEALs were no longer prey. They were part of a coordinated killing machine, their rifles picking off enemies flushed from cover by Raven's attacks. The Taliban assault had faltered, then broken. Fighters were pulling back, seeking cover, trying to escape the aircraft that seemed to be everywhere at once. Raven checked her fuel. She had 20 minutes before she'd need to break off for tanker support. 20 minutes to finish this. Trident 7, Hog 1-1. I need coordinates on remaining enemy concentrations. Talk me onto targets. Tors from his position in the rocks. Hog 1-1. We have approximately 40 hostiles in the compounds to our northwest. Grid November Tango 7344. They're the ones with the MANPADS. Copy, engaging northwest compounds. She came in from the south this time, low and fast, the A-10's shadow racing across the ground ahead of her. The compounds grew in her targeting display, mud brick walls, flat roofs, figures running between buildings. She pickled off her last 2 Mavericks, watched them streak down and punch through walls before detonating. The compounds erupted in fire and collapsing masonry. Then the second MANPADS launch, this one from directly ahead. No time for flares, no time for evasion, just reaction. Raven yanked the stick hard right, rolling the A-10 90 degrees, presenting the smallest possible target profile. The missile flashed past her canopy, close enough that she saw the motor burn, close enough that she felt the heat through the cockpit glass. Too close. She leveled out, heart hammering, and keyed the radio. Hog 1-1 is still up. Continue engagement. The professionalism in her voice never wavered. But in her chest, her heart was screaming. The battle reached its crescendo in the 10th minute of Raven's engagement. The Taliban forces, realizing they were being systematically destroyed, attempted one final coordinated assault on the SEAL position. Approximately 30 fighters surged from cover simultaneously, a desperate gambit to overrun the Americans before the aircraft could react. Cross saw them coming and knew his team didn't have enough ammunition to stop them all. The math was simple and brutal. They were going to be overrun. Then Raven dove through a curtain of tracer fire, angled the A-10 almost vertical, and held down the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger fired at its maximum rate of 4,000 rounds per minute, and the 30mm depleted uranium penetrators turned the charging Taliban fighters into a killing field that would haunt Cross's dreams for the rest of his life. The sound was apocalyptic. The effect was absolute. When the A-10 pulled up and the dust cleared, the assault had been erased from existence. The valley went quiet. Not silent, there were still scattered shots, still the moans of the wounded, but the organized attack had ended. The enemy was broken, scattered, fleeing into the mountains or hiding in whatever cover they could find. The siege was over. Tors keyed his radio with shaking hands. Hog 1-1, Trident 7, we're secure. The position is secure. You saved our lives. There was a pause. Then Raven's voice, matter of fact. That's the job, Trident 7. I'm going to maintain overhead coverage until your extraction arrives. Apache team is inbound 10 minutes out. You're not alone anymore. Cross looked at Morrison, who was still breathing, still alive against all odds. He looked at his team, at the men who'd survived because a pilot he'd never met had flown into hell and refused to leave. He wanted to say something profound, something worthy of the moment. Instead, he just keyed the radio and said, "Thank you." "No thanks necessary," Raven replied. "Just bring everyone home." She climbed to a safer altitude and began orbiting the valley, eyes scanning for any remaining threats. Her hands were steady on the controls, her breathing even, but inside she was processing what had just happened. She'd taken fire from 2 MANPADS, multiple machine guns, and countless small arms. She'd flown lower than tactical doctrine recommended. She'd made herself a target to take pressure off the team below. And it had worked. They were alive. 12 Americans who'd been counting their last bullets were now going to see another sunrise. The fuel gauge caught her attention. She was at bingo fuel, the point where she needed to leave for the tanker or risk not making it back to base. But the Apache team wasn't here yet. The SEALs were still vulnerable. She made her decision. Bagram Hog 11, I'm extending on station. Current fuel state is below bingo. Will depart when relief arrives. There was a long pause. Then Webb's voice came through. Hog 11 Bagram Actual, understood. Be advised you're cutting it very close. Yes, sir, I'm aware. She kept circling, kept watching, kept the faith. The Apache arrived 8 minutes later, a flight of 2 AH-64s that swooped into the valley like avenging angels. Their crews checked in with Raven, took over the overhead protection, and she finally turned southwest toward the tanker track. Hog 11 is off station, she transmitted. Trident 7, stay safe down there. We will, Torres replied, because of you. The flight back was long and quiet, just Raven and her thoughts in the steady drone of the turbofans. She rendezvoused with a KC-135 tanker over Kandahar province, took on fuel, and then continued to base. The sun was fully up now, the sky brilliant blue, the kind of perfect morning that made you forget there was a war happening below. She thought about the SEALs, about how close they'd come to dying, about the decisions she'd made in those frantic minutes. Any one of them could have killed her. Any one of them could have failed, but they hadn't. She'd trusted her training, trusted her aircraft, and trusted that sometimes the right thing to do was the dangerous thing. The tower cleared her for landing. She brought the A-10 down gently, the main gear chirping on the runway, and taxied to her parking spot. The crew chief was waiting, and when she shut down the engines and climbed out, he was staring at her aircraft with wide eyes. "Captain," he said slowly, "you know you've got bullet holes in the vertical stabilizer." Raven looked. Sure enough, 3 neat punctures through the right tail fin, probably from a heavy machine gun. She'd never felt them, never noticed during the flight. The A-10 had just absorbed the damage and kept flying. "Yeah," she said, "we got busy up there." The crew chief shook his head in amazement. "I'll get started on the repairs. You need to debrief." "Soon, I need to file my report first." She walked toward the operations building, her flight suit sweat-stained, her body exhausted, her mind still processing. Other pilots were gathered near the building, watching her approach. She recognized the looks, respect mixed with something else. Curiosity maybe, or wariness. She'd built a reputation over the past months, and not all of it was positive. Too aggressive, some said, too willing to take risks, too something. But today, 12 SEALs were alive because of those risks. She filed her after-action report methodically, documenting every weapons release, every tactical decision, every moment of the engagement. She noted the MANPADS launches, the close calls, the bullet damage. She recommended commendations for the SEAL team's defensive actions. She finished, signed her name, and submitted it to the intelligence section for analysis. Then she found an empty office, sat down in a chair, and let herself shake for exactly 5 minutes. The adrenaline crash hit her like a physical blow, her hands trembling, her breath coming short. She'd held it together through the mission, through the flight back, through the debrief. Now she let herself feel it, the fear, the exhaustion, the crushing weight of responsibility. Then she stood up, smoothed her flight suit, and went to find food. The mission was over, but the war continued. There would be another brief tomorrow, another threat, another desperate call for help. That was the nature of this rotation. You saved who you could, mourned who you couldn't, and got ready to do it again. In the operations center, Webb was reviewing Raven's report when his deputy, Major Sarah Chen, approached. "Sir, the preliminary assessment from the SEAL team is in. Chief Cross estimates Kavak's intervention prevented a complete loss of the element. They were minutes from being overrun." Webb nodded slowly. She took significant risks. She saved 12 lives. Both things can be true. Chen hesitated, then said what others had been thinking. She's been different since that incident in Helmand, more aggressive, like she's trying to prove something. Webb looked up from the report. Maybe she is, or maybe she's just learned that sometimes you have to risk yourself to save others. The question isn't whether her tactics are aggressive. The question is whether they're effective. He tapped the report. According to this, they are. So you're not concerned. I'm always concerned when pilots fly into MANPADS range, but I'm more concerned about those SEALs being dead. He closed the folder. Make sure Kavak gets a day off. She's earned it. But Raven didn't take the day off. She was back at the flight line the next morning, running pre-flight checks on a different A-10 while hers was being repaired. The crew chief tried to protest. "Captain, you're supposed to be on crew rest," but she waved him off. There was a mission brief in an hour. A convoy needed close air support in Zabul province. The war didn't care about crew rest. She flew 3 more missions that week, each one a variation on the same theme: American forces in danger, enemies in the open, an A-10 diving through hostile fire to even the odds. Her reputation began to shift. The whispers about Helmand didn't disappear, but they were joined by new stories. The SEALs from the Korangal talked about her to anyone who would listen. Word spread through the special operations community. Other pilots started seeking her advice, asking about her tactics. She remained professionally distant, not quite cold but not warm either. Focused, driven, as if she were carrying something heavy that only she could see. 3 weeks after the Korangal mission, she was called to Webb's office. She stood at attention, wondering if this was finally the reprimand some officers had been pushing for. Instead, Webb gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Captain. This isn't that kind of meeting." She sat back straight, hands on her knees. "I've been reading the reports from your missions," Webb continued. "All of them, not just the recent ones. Do you know what I see?" "Sir, I see a pattern. You consistently place yourself at greater risk than doctrine requires. You fly lower, stay longer, and engage closer to friendly forces than any other pilot in theater. Your tactics work, but they're predicated on you being willing to die if that's what it takes." Raven met his eyes. "With respect, sir, that's every CAS pilot's job description." "No, every CAS pilot accepts risk. You seek it out, there's a difference." He leaned back. "I'm not reprimanding you. Your results speak for themselves, but I need to understand, what are you trying to prove?" The question hung in the air. Raven considered deflecting, giving the expected answer about duty and mission success. Instead, she found herself being honest. "I lost a team in Helmand, sir, 5 months ago. They were pinned down, I was their air support, and I made a decision that didn't work. By the time I realized my mistake, they were gone, all of them." Webb's expression didn't change. "I read that report too. The investigation cleared you. The tactical situation was impossible." "The investigation was wrong, sir. I should have been more aggressive. I should have taken more risks. I flew by the book and 5 men died. So now I don't fly by the book anymore. I fly the way I should have flown that day." There was silence. Then Webb said quietly, "You can't save them retroactively, Captain." "No, sir, but I can make sure I never make that mistake again." "Even if it kills you?" Raven smiled without humor, "Especially then." Webb studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand, but you need to understand something too. The Korangal mission worked because you were skilled, lucky, and flying an aircraft that can absorb punishment. Sooner or later, one of those factors will fail. skill, luck, or armor. And when it does, I don't want to be writing a letter to your family explaining that you died because you were trying to atone for something that wasn't your fault. Noted, sir. That's not a dismissal, Captain. That's an order. You're too valuable to lose to survivors' guilt. The men in Helmand would want you to survive, not to join them. Raven looked away, jaw tight. Permission to return to duty, sir. Webb sighed. Granted, but Kavak, the next time you're tempted to do something suicidal, remember that there are people who need you alive more than dead. Dismissed. She stood, saluted, and left. The conversation lingered in her mind for hours afterward, unwelcome and uncomfortable. She'd spent 5 months building a wall between herself and those feelings, and Webb had cracked it open with a few sentences. That night, alone in her quarters, she let herself remember Helmand. The faces of the men she'd failed. The radio calls that had gone from urgent to desperate to silent. The moment she'd understood they were gone, and that she could have prevented it if she'd just been braver, faster, better. She sat on her bunk with her head in her hands and let the grief come. It was brief, violent, and then over. She washed her face, squared her shoulders, and went back to being the pilot everyone needed her to be, controlled, competent, ready. The rhythm of deployment continued. Missions blurred together, Helmand, Kandahar, Zabul, Uruzgan, back to the Korangal. Each one was different, each one was the same. Americans in danger, Raven overhead, problem solved with 30mm depleted uranium. She accumulated flight hours, mission counts, and the quiet respect of the ground forces who knew her call sign. Hog 11 inbound became a phrase that meant relief, that meant someone was watching, that meant you weren't alone anymore. 2 months after the SEAL rescue, she was flying armed reconnaissance over Kunar province when she intercepted a radio call that made her blood freeze. A medevac helicopter, call sign Dustov 63, had been hit by ground fire while attempting to extract wounded Marines from a firefight. The helicopter had crash-landed in hostile territory, and the crew and wounded were now stranded, taking fire from multiple directions, waiting for help that was still 30 minutes away. 30 minutes they didn't have. Raven checked her position. She was 12 minutes out. Dustov 63 wasn't her assigned mission, wasn't her responsibility, wasn't even in her sector. But she could hear the fear in the pilot's voice as he called for help, could hear the weapons fire in the background, could hear history trying to repeat itself. She banked hard toward Kunar, advancing the throttles. Bagram, Hog 11, I'm diverting to assist Dustov 63. Request immediate clearance. There was chaos on the radio as controllers tried to coordinate, tried to establish priorities, tried to balance resources. Raven cut through it. Bagram, people are dying. I'm the closest asset. Clear me hot or I'm engaging anyway. Webb's voice came through, tight with tension. Hog 11 Bagram actual, you are cleared, save them. Wilco. She pushed the A-10 to its limits, the airframe shuddering with the speed. Mountains flashed past her wings. The radio was alive with desperate transmissions as the Dustov crew tried to organize a defense with wounded men and limited ammunition. Raven listened, building a mental picture of the tactical situation. The helicopter was in a small valley, surrounded by ridgelines. Enemies were on 3 sides. The crew had maybe 10 minutes before they were overrun. She entered the valley at 6,000 feet and immediately took fire. Tracers arced up from multiple positions, creating a web of glowing death. She ignored them, focused on finding the helicopter. There, a crumpled A-60 Black Hawk in a clearing, its rotors bent, its fuselage scarred with bullet holes. Figures were crouched behind it, returning fire toward the ridgelines. Dustov 63, Hog 11, I've got eyes on, marking your position. Get everyone behind the helicopter now. Hog 11, we have wounded who can't move. Then cover them and pray. She rolled into her attack run, diving through the ground fire. The GAU-8 came alive, walking across a ridgeline where Taliban fighters were massing for an assault. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Bodies disappeared. Weapons flew through the air. The ridge became a moonscape of craters and dust. But the other ridgelines kept firing. Raven pulled up, rolled left, came around for another pass. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked past her wing, close enough to see the fins stabilizing. She jinked right, launched flares, and put Hydra rockets into the compound where the RPG had originated. The building collapsed in a shower of mud bricks and wooden beams. Dust off 6-3, how many wounded? 5 critical, 3 ambulatory, and our crew. We need immediate extraction. Working on it, keep your heads down. She spent the next 8 minutes turning the valley into a killing field, systematically destroying every enemy position she could identify. The A-10 absorbed hits, more bullet holes, more scars, but kept flying. Always kept flying. When the Apache team arrived, she briefed them quickly and efficiently, marking targets, coordinating fires. When the rescue helicopter came in, she flew low cover, daring anyone to shoot at it. They got everyone out. All the wounded, all the crew, everyone who'd been waiting to die in that valley. As the rescue bird climbed away, the dust-off pilot transmitted, "Hog 1-1, I don't know how to thank you." Raven watched the helicopter disappear toward safety and felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, crack, like ice beginning to thaw. "Just take care of your wounded," she said quietly. "That's all the thanks I need." She flew back to base in silence, her mind far away. That night, for the first time in 5 months, she didn't dream about Helmand. She didn't dream about the men she'd failed. Instead, she dreamed about all the ones she'd saved. The SEALs in the Korangal, the dust-off crew in Kunar, the convoys, the outposts, the desperate voices on the radio who'd called her name and lived because she'd answered. Maybe Webb had been right. Maybe she couldn't save the men from Helmand, but she could save everyone who came after. And maybe, eventually, that would be enough. The deployment wound toward its end, each day bringing her closer to rotation back to the States. She flew her final missions with the same intensity she'd brought to the first ones, never backing down, never holding back. Her A-10 accumulated damage faster than the maintenance crews could repair it: bullet holes, shrapnel scars, stress fractures in the airframe from hard maneuvering. The crew chief joked that her aircraft had more patches than original metal. "She's held together by hope and profanity," he told her one morning while examining new damage from the previous day's mission. "Like her pilot," Raven replied. "Yeah, I've noticed. You planning to ease up before you break something? When the deployment ends. What if you break before then?" She looked at him seriously. "Then fix me like you fix the jet. Patch me up and send me back out." He shook his head but didn't argue. You couldn't argue with someone who decided their life was secondary to the mission. You could only make sure their equipment,